You're muted. Two. Microphone check 1, 2. Yeah. So it's different input. Oh, screen sharing is stopped. Go back to share. Just so you know, we're sharing this screen only. So anything that goes on that screen is what's going to share. Which, whether that means anything, I got to click back on. Here.
Okay.
Yeah. So what happens is, like, if I touch something over here on this cursor,
yeah,
it's not going to allow you to click anything. So you have to click this screen, and it'll allow you to.
Is he going to do some introduction or something like that? And then
Probably
like,
use after this.
here, so I can, yeah.
Yes, let's see if you can advance now. It should be. I clicked on it. So. And then put this on you, just so you know that green light means we're on. If it's switched to that this yellowish color, it's off.
Okay.
The yellow green is off. Green is,
Can I-
yeah, you should be able to. Good. Where the light.
Hey everyone, can you guys hear me? Can everyone on Zoom hear me? If yes, write yes in the chat, I guess. Perfect. Thank you guys for coming today to APhA ASP Population Health, the event focused on nutrition. This is the first in a series. And our speaker today is Dr. Corri Hanson, a tenured professor of nutrition and the director of the Medical Nutrition Education Program in the College of Allied Health Professions. Dr. Hanson holds a bachelor's and a master's degree in human nutrition from the University of Nebraska, as well as a PhD in clinical and translational research from the University of Nebraska Medical Center. She was the inaugural recipient of the M. Patricia and James W. Lucian Professorship for Advancing Research in the Allied Health Professions, and her career is dedicated to understanding effects of nutrition on the promotion of health and the development and progression of disease over the life course. Let's give her a warm welcome.
You guys hear me okay? My little clip on microphone, perfect. All right. Oh gosh, thank you so much for being here. This is really probably, I've given many lectures in this room to medical students, and this is the first time I've been back in this room for like 3 years. So I'm not sure I remember how to do this live. So I'll do my best as I've got all my little technology pieces here. I'll probably be like going, now wait a minute, how do I mute or share my screen or something like that? Because gosh, it's been a long time since I've done a talk in person. Really, I hope to just have some fun with nutrition today. I'm going to talk about a certain topic, but I certainly want you to feel free to ask questions or share stories or anything like that you might have. I'm very informal, very casual. Just want to kind of tell you some things I know and how they might help translate to some situations where you're working with patients. And when we were working, I was working with Daniel and the committee, and we were kind of talking about on Zoom, because, you know, this is like the first time we've ever met in person, that, you know, what are we going to talk about? Nutrition is obviously a very broad topic. And if we want to back this up and talk like population-based nutrition as opposed to disease state nutrition, what are we going to talk about? What would be a good topic? And we kind of landed on plant-based diets. That was something that was proposed by the committee that might be of interest. And it also happens to be something that I've been working on recently. So it seems like it aligned pretty well. And it's a very recent topic. It's in the news, been in the news quite a bit lately. It's been in the literature quite a bit lately, and it's been on TikTok quite a bit lately. And so I think of those three, I know which one actually probably has the widest method of dissemination. So as healthcare professionals, it is really, really important for us to understand how to interpret and help patients understand these things that they're going to hear on the news and on TikTok, but that we're reading in the literature. So that's one of our main sources of information, but that's not what people are hearing. And so we need to be able to bridge that gap and really help them understand what is the best for them to be able to do for their health. So hopefully that's what we'll talk a little bit about today. So I titled my talk, The Power of Plants, because I'm terrible at titles and I couldn't think of anything better. My first thought, I was going to title the talk Plants versus Zombies, or is everybody to, okay, that, all right. I was like, I think that may date me. That seems like a really old video game now. And zombies obviously being the people who don't eat a plant-based diet, I guess was kind of where I was going with that, but okay. So we're going to go over just just kind of a very, very rough outline. First of all, why are we talking about plant-based diets today? What are plant-based diets? What does the research show about plant-based diets and versus what might consumers be hearing about plant-based diets? And how do they kind of all work together? And then why would these work? One thing as a healthcare professional that you're always going to be thinking about as you read research, as you go on in your careers and start to publish research with nutrition, one thing you always want to think about is biological plausibility. Does that just even make sense that this works? Or is this, just probably something weird that happened? So why are we talking about them today? Well, the reason we're talking about them today is because everybody else out there is talking about them, I think. So these are just a couple pictures. So I Googled plant-based diet. That's all I did. I Googled plant-based diet at home and then shut off my computer, walked away, did something else. And then like the next day waited to see what kind of ads popped up. And so after I did that, these are some of the ads I've got. The top lady there is like, I'm hoping a computer generated person because she does not look real. But one of the pop-ups I got was celebrities are eating plant-based diets to make their skin beautiful. Another pop-up I got showed me all of the celebrities, that's the 6 boxes below, all of it was like it was clickbait, wanted me to click on it, but it was like, these celebrities swear by plant-based diets. And so immediately just the amount of information that I was getting pushed at me as soon as I Googled plant-based diet was just phenomenal. You've all experienced that with something or other, the targeted ads for sure. Well, it definitely was working in this case. There are books out there. The other thing that started to pop up for me was links to bloggers' websites and things like that. There was definitely a couple influencers then that got into my YouTube, because then they started popping up on my YouTube account, like people promoting their plant-based diet website or their plant-based diet links or something like that. So there's plenty of people out there pushing their philosophy on this. So the first thing to cover is, what does that mean? When people talk about plant-based diets, what does that mean? I guess the thing to know about the definition of a plant-based diet is if you talk to one person about their plant-based diet, you've talked to one person about their plant-based diet. The definitions of this go on and on and on all day. Some people talk about a plant-based diet because they are eating mostly plants and they just view their diet that way. You can be a flexitarian, which means you're flexible. You can be all of the vegetarians. So you can be vegan. You can be a macrobiotic vegan, which would probably be the strictest interpretation of vegan. You can be a raw vegan, where you don't eat any cooked food, but you can also be a vegetarian that's a little bit more flexible, a vegetarian that eats mostly a cooked plant-based diet, but also some eat eggs, some drink milk. There are so many different versions of this that if you're talking to one of your patients and they say they're a vegetarian, it's worth some follow-up questions to try and figure out exactly what their understanding of that is. Well, what does that mean? Do you allow any Do you allow fish? Do you allow milk? That's going to help you understand what kind of nutrient deficiencies you might need to watch for in that person. So if we're looking at vegetarian diets, so let's take kind of a consumer perspective here and talk about vegetarian diets and do they work? Are they good for you? So one of the first things to know, the picture there, is that it is actually really easy to eat a vegetarian diet and eat crap. Most people assume that a vegetarian diet is healthy, and that is not at all true. You can eat all the Skittles you want on a vegetarian diet. You can eat macaroni and cheese, you can eat cookies, you can eat French fries. And as you can see on that plate there, there's a little bit of token broccoli. So being a vegetarian does not necessarily mean that it's a healthy diet. So that's one version of a plant-based vegetarian diet versus another version of a plant-based vegetarian diet where you can see the entire plate there is some sort of fruits or vegetables. So when you look in the literature, you are going to see all sorts of conflicting results. You'll see people that have studied a vegetarian diet, like they studied people who said they were vegetarian versus people who just followed their normal diet pattern. And then they look and see, do they have a difference in disease outcomes? And there's been a big meta-analysis, more than one. I just picked one, but one big meta-analysis of a lot of studies showed that people self-report that they eat a vegetarian diet had a lower risk of ischemic heart disease, but they did not have a lower risk of cardiovascular disease or death. Now, that doesn't mean that a vegetarian diet is bad for you or doesn't help you. It means that the vegetarian diet that the people were eating in the study probably included a lot of Skittles and French fries. So you really need to understand what your patient's perspective on their vegetarian diet is before you can give them any guidance on whether or not. You don't just want to say, okay, good for you, carry on, and assume that that is going to lower their risk of incident disease or help them in the long run. To a researcher. All right, so when you're going to read the literature, now as a healthcare professional, you're probably going to be reading about this in the literature. Well, now we try to get a little bit stricter on what we're talking about and come up with standardized definitions so that we have, we know what we're talking about when we want to report these findings in our research. There's a couple different ways that people do this. So what we're trying to do here is just come up with some sort of scoring system where we can rank people relative to each other. A lot of times in nutrition research, what happens, I'm not saying that I'm going to do a randomized control trial and these people are only going to eat plants for 50 years and these people are going to eat Skittles and French fries for 50 years. That's, these kind of randomized control trials are hard to do. So a lot of our research is observational cohorts. When you're doing that, we want to rank people relative to each other. So we create these scores. And that's what these, when you see this, that's what these things are, a plant-based diet. I'll show you a couple of them. We're trying to create a scoring system so that we know that I ate less plants relative to all of you. The back row of people here had the highest number of plants and I had the lowest number of plants. That doesn't mean you guys ate a lot. It just means you ate more than I did. These scoring systems are all relative to each other. Does that make sense? So if you say that we know that you have to eat 10 plants a day to be healthy, in these scoring systems, I could eat 1 and you guys could eat 5, but you would still be the high plant group. This is where just the push for reading the methods of a research article comes in, not just reading the abstract, which is what 95% of us want to do. We read the conclusion of the abstract and kind of move on. But we really need to understand how they are doing this so that we know how to interpret it. So a plant-based diet quality index, the PDI. So this emphasizes, in its truest form, this emphasizes helpful plant-based derived foods. So they create a scoring system where you don't get points for eating French fries, but you do get points for eating sweet potatoes or broccoli or something like that. Healthy plant-based. Now there's a flip side of it where they look at the unhealthy plant foods too. So you've got a PDI, which is an overall score, a healthy plant-based diet score, and an unhealthy plant-based diet score, because you can certainly make your plants unhealthy if you put enough cheese whiz on them, for sure. So that, again, just needing to understand how they score it before you can interpret it. So when we look at these, what do they show? Well, the healthy one in the research really looks pretty good, as you would expect it to. A healthy plant-based diet appears to be very good for you. An unhealthy plant-based diet is less for good for you. That makes sense. I just, put an example of a recent publication up here that showed that a plant-based diet is associated with cause-specific mortality. The thing in this study that is a little bit interesting is that it was associated with cardiovascular mortality. It was not associated with mortality from cancer. When they looked at all-cause mortality, they looked at cardiovascular disease and looked at cancer as another one. So plants protected you from cardiovascular disease, dying from cardiovascular disease. They did not protect you from dying from cancer. And so I know all of you now are wondering in your mind, why would that be? Because aren't plants supposed to be really good for cancer? And this becomes a good example of where people say nutrition doesn't work. Look at that. These people ate a ton of plants and they still died from cancer. So what was the point of them following that healthy diet? And then they move on and say, well, nutrition doesn't work. Didn't cure cancer, didn't stop anything. That wasn't very good for them. Never mind. Well, let me show you an example of why maybe things like this come out the way that they do. But before I do that, I'm going to go on to another scoring system, which takes a little bit of a different approach. The plant-based diet index really does try to stick to specifically just scoring plants. And the more plants you eat, the more points you get, the higher you score. The more unhealthy plants you eat, the less points you get, you end up with a different kind of score. But it really doesn't take into account things like seafood or things that are, as seafood's a great source of omega-3s. We know those are really, really good for you and probably really helpful when we're talking about pathophysiology of disease, especially those that have some sort of underlying inflammatory pathophysiology. But the plant-based scores don't really account for that. So a relatively new one that has come out in the past few years is the APDQS. And this is the one that I've done the most work with and have the most experience with. So this acknowledges that a plant-based diet is probably very good for you and very healthy, but that there may be room in it to include some types of animal products that also can have some beneficial effects. Okay. The underlying viewpoint, I'll just read it right, is that dietary practices with more flexible options can ensure that the general population achieves and maintains healthy eating patterns over long periods of life. Now also keep in mind that a lot of times these studies are geared at the general population. These are not specific guidelines for somebody who has an existing disease. Nutrition guidelines can be different for people when it's part of the management of a disease. Usually we're looking at incident disease here, the development of some sort of chronic disease. So let's just go over how the APDQS is scored. So it's scored, foods are put into broad categories. It's really easy for us in research to find out what people eat. That's actually not hard. We have really, really good ways of doing that. And we can categorize it and put all of these foods together. Like any of us could probably do a pretty good job of putting fruit into a fruit category. That's not terribly hard. And then we can assign that a score. And then we can add up all the categories and things like that and, give everybody their relative score. So the APDQS has 3 categories: beneficial, neutral, and adverse effects. So if you look at what's beneficial, okay, some of these are pretty self-explanatory: fruit, tomato, avocado, vegetables, nuts, seeds, beans, poultry, tea, coffee. Some of these are probably somewhat straightforward, but if you look at some of the things that give you points for a healthy diet in the APDQS, what do you guys think about beer? Probably put some pretty good feelings about that right now, especially on a Friday when you're in, medical school. Probably sounds like, thank goodness, that's healthy for me. Beer and wine, alcohol. You get points for alcohol in the APDQS. Has anybody been watching the news lately about what the American Cancer Society has to say about alcohol? None whatsoever in your diet. Any alcohol in your diet increases your risk of cancer. So is it the fault of a healthy diet? Or, to that previous study, where a plant-based diet did not protect you from cancer? Was it the fault of the plant-based diet or is it the fault of the scoring? It's probably the thing, oops, okay. It's probably the scoring system that is the problem, not nutrition. Does that make sense? You can't read that paper and say, well, diet doesn't protect against cancer. No, diet does protect against cancer, definitely. There's probably something in the methods of the study that is predisposing the researchers towards null findings. Yeah. Absolutely. And what about coffee? Be good for you? Exactly. Exactly. Is it? I don't know. Did anybody see the news last night? Coffee intake reduces all-cause mortality. All over researchers at Harvard, I believe. You'll hear that on the news all the time. Researchers at Harvard had found that coffee reduces mortality, reduces death rate. And this is what your patients are hearing. You know, they're hearing this on the news. We need to be able to come back and interpret these things for them. We need to understand this score because it may be that including those things predisposes you to findings with one disease state, but not another. So if I include beer and wine in here, that may help with cardiovascular disease. So, okay, red wine, that's been shown to decrease rate of cardiovascular disease, lots of resveratrol, which is a very powerful antioxidant, but the American Cancer Society is saying no alcohol. So can I expect this diet to apply magically to all diseases? Or do you think that it may have different effects depending on what outcome you're looking at? You know, these are things you just have to think about when you read these findings. So let's go to the neutral. Potatoes, refined grains, margarine, chocolate. Okay, at least chocolate's not bad. Meal replacements, pickled foods, sugar substitutes, shellfish, eggs, soup. It's a pretty general category. Okay, diet, soft drinks, fruit juice. All right, anybody have any thoughts on any of these being neutral? Anybody have any thoughts on margarine being neutral? Mhm. Yep. Okay. Lean red meats are neutral. All right, let's go to adverse. So these are the ones that you would get negative points for. All right, fried potatoes, grain desserts, salty snacks, pastries, sweets, high-fat red meat, processed organ. Okay, so margarine is neutral, butter is adverse in this scoring system. And I'm going to go back to slide 2 and I'll show you refined grains are neutral in this scoring system. Okay, and we can argue all day about how we feel about this. The point is, this is how they created the score. And this is how outcomes are going to be impacted. So when you read the study that the APDQS is not associated with the development of cancer, it's probably not the fault of nutrition. A good diet probably still prevents cancer. It probably has something to do with the underlying scoring system. Does that make sense? Nutrition literature is really, really hard for people to understand and put into context and explain to their patients. You know, you get out and you start to work with patients, talk to them about nutrition. The number one thing I think you're going to hear that I've heard over my career from people, you guys change your mind all the time. You know, what was good for me yesterday isn't good for me today. Well, I'm just going to do whatever I want because you can't make up your mind, you know. And my response to that is, I know, isn't that great? I mean, look at what a dynamic, exciting, changing field this is. It's really exciting, but it can be really confusing to people. Well, some of my own research recently, just a shameless plug, I guess, for my own research, I'm interested in the lungs. And a lot of people have a really hard time making a connection between nutrition and lungs. And even pulmonologists. Are there any future pulmonologists in the room or on Zoom? I guess I can't see on Zoom. Anybody getting ready to head into their pulmonary fellowship or anything like that? Even pulmonologists sometimes think of people as lungs out walking around and really have a hard time with, like, how could nutrition possibly impact lungs? And I do a lot of research really showing that it does. So one example of our research is we took the Cardia study. The Cardia cohort is basically a huge ongoing prospective trial. We looked at about 1,700 people and we scored them according to the APDQS. And then we looked at a couple things. We were looking at respiratory outcomes. We looked at emphysema, which is basically lung structure. And we looked at lung function, which is self-explanatory. That is the function of the lungs. So we're looking at not only the function of the lungs, but did diet impact the structure of the lungs? And just to give you a quick, without going into all of the stuff, just some quick pictures. So if you just look at the people who ate the worst diet are quintile 1. Across the bottom, when you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, quintile 1 is the lowest APDQS score, the worst diet. Quintile 5 is the people who ate the best diet. The numbers, the bars, is the proportion of people in each of those quintiles of diet that had emphysema. So you can just see right in the picture that if you ate a bad diet, 25% of them had emphysema. And if you ate a good diet, only 4% of them had emphysema. We're actually talking about structural changes to the lung now with diet. And this held up even when we went on to did all of our statistics, all of our adjusting for confounders, all of the things that you do to try and ensure that your research has all the rigor you possibly could. We saw the same thing with lung function. Oh, wow, that's really messed up on the bottom. But basically what these are trajectories of lung health over time. So each separate bar represents a trajectory of lung health over time, not a measurement of lung function at one point in time. How did people's lung function change over 20 years? And we have 5 trajectories going from persistently poor to getting worse to peaking, staying the same, peaking, rapidly declining, and peaking, slow declining. And basically what you can see the blue. If you just look at the blue and the green is bad diet, the green is good diet. So in the group that had the worst lung health trajectory over time, the first one has the highest blue column. And then on the end, you can see that the people who ate the best diet have the highest green column. Those were the people on the end. These people had they didn't peak very high as far as their lung health went, and they declined rapidly. The people on the other end achieved a high peak of lung health and declined slowly over time. And same thing, this really held up for us over time, or held up for us after we did all of our statistical dancing around and adjusted for confounders and did all that kind of stuff. So for lung health anyway, it appears that scoring system that I just showed you is fairly robust. Whatever is in those categories seems to be okay for lung health. That doesn't mean this would hold up for cancer or for metabolic syndrome or for brain health, any other thing that you might look at. Yes. The lung function is spirometry, multiple points in time over 20 years. It was at least annually. It might have been every 6 months. Over time for 20 years. So that's a big commitment. The emphysema is CT scans. All right. So anybody following a majority of their, so I stick this slide in here, a quick veering away from research because I am a dietitian by training. And so I just have to come back to like, okay, people following plant-based diets, what should you watch out for? Well, protein. The number one thing that's actually really hard for people on a plant-based diet to get enough is protein. That's kind of challenging. And especially as people get older. And I think we're kind of starting to realize how important protein is preventing against frailty and sarcopenia as people age. And I can take my mom as an example that she's 80, she has osteoporosis, she's just your typical kind of little old lady. And I'm always honored to eat more protein. And so she'll take like a bite of cottage cheese and she'll say, I ate protein. You know, that's not quite good enough, Mom. You know, it is actually quite a challenge. And so some of your elderly patients, you do want to make sure that once they hear on the news last night that a plant-based diet, you know, reduced all-cause mortality or something like that, that they are still making sure they have good sources of protein in their diet. Iron is hard, calcium can be hard, and B12 can be hard. And so if you feel like these people are not doing that well with these nutrients, send them to us. That's what we're here for. Send them to a dietitian so that we can work with them and get them to have good sources of these things in their diet while still maintaining whatever kind of pattern they want to stick to that they believe. Why would these work? Coming back to biological plausibility, why would a plant-based diet be good for me? Why is it good for your lungs? How on earth is a plant-based diet good for your lungs? Why is it good for your cardiovascular system? You know, we kind of understand that, but how is it possible that what we eat has all of these systemic effects? And I think the answer to that is that we do not know. If you ask me this as yes or no question, do we know why a good diet is good for you? I'd have to say no. We don't understand. Nutrition is complicated. It's the simplest thing in the world, and it is the most complicated thing in the world. And one thing that as we get through this talk that I want you to take away as future healthcare professionals is that nutrients are pharmacologically active. These are not things that you eat that do nothing. They have jobs and they are on a mission and they head out and they do what they are supposed to do. And there are so many mechanisms here that we know about, and there are so many mechanisms that we know absolutely nothing about that, that we have some ideas, pretty much. One possible mechanism that I put down here is, of course, the microbiome, which, as you all know, sure you all know what the microbiome is, right? And I'm sure you all know that in this day and age, the microbiome is the cause of everything and cures everything. That's kind of where we are with it. It's a really impressive and evolving body of research. It's very complicated as well, and we may never have all of the answers there. As you might expect, there are huge interactions between what you eat and the microbiome in your GI tract. And again, we are just beginning to understand this. One, again, very narrow possible mechanism, just to give you an example, is short chain fatty acids. So when you eat fiber, the school of thought on fiber used to be that fiber is good for you and prevents colon cancer, basically because it's kind of scritchy and it just goes through your GI tract and it scritches away at the walls of the intestine, and all the bad stuff kind of gets scrubbed away and moved on through. But we now know that fiber is a class of nutrients by themselves that are used to be soluble, insoluble. That's not even close anymore. You know, we have so many categories of different fibers now that are all completely different, and they are metabolized by your microbiome. If you have good bacteria, they love fiber. So the more good bacteria you have in your colon, they love fiber, and they all love different kinds of fiber. They metabolize this fiber. It's their food. They take it and they eat it. The byproducts of the microbiome eating the fiber that you eat is short chain fatty acids, acetate, propionate, butyrol. You know, these are basically the three main short chain fatty acids that are then released from the GI tract and become systemic. We've measured this. In my work, we've measured this. We give people fiber with a certain microbiome, and we can see that the levels of short chain fatty acids in their circulation rises. Short chain fatty acids are powerful anti-inflammatory molecules. So once they become systemic, now they can exert all of these anti-inflammatory effects way outside of the confines of the GI tract. Lipidomics. So the field of omics, we can do proteomics, we can do lipidomics, we can do all kinds of we can do genetics, genomics, we can do, so many of the omics fields now. And these are completely opening, our eyes as to, like I mentioned, like how pharmacologically active nutrients really are. So a lot of you have probably know that omega-3s are probably good for you. It's pretty common knowledge. Oh, you should eat omega-3. Okay, but why? Why? What are they doing? Well, again, just one explanation is that omega-3 fatty acids lipids are like powerful and interesting, and they are metabolized through several steps. But one of those steps, and one of the very end products of the metabolism of omega-3 fatty acids, is what's called specialized pro-resolving mediators, SPMs. They are myrisins, resolvins, protectins. Those molecules are the molecules in your body that are responsible for resolving inflammation. That's how we resolve inflammation, through our diet. You've got to eat these molecules. You've got to eat omega-3s in order to provide the substrate to make specialized pro-resolving mediators. And they resolve inflammation. Inflammation isn't bad. We talk about inflammation a lot in disease states like it's a bad thing. Well, it's got to happen. We wouldn't be able to fight off a disease or an infection or heal a wound if inflammation didn't happen. A lot of times the problem with disease comes in when your inflammation fails to resolve. And that's what omega-3s do for you. After an insult, your level of SPM production goes up, and it's those SPMs that are responsible for helping tamp down that chronic inflammation. So they're very, very important in our diet, and a possible mechanism for maybe not why a plant-based diet works. Well, that's not true, because you can actually get omega-3s from plants. Conversion is just a little worse than if you eat it from fish. So antioxidants. So this makes sense, right? Plants are so high in antioxidants. There are like, what are antioxidants? Oh my gosh, there's so many of them. But basically, if you think that they're color, so anytime your food is colorful, it is high in antioxidants. Sweet potatoes, blueberries, anything green, anything orange, anything red, tomatoes. There are hundreds and hundreds of different antioxidants. And when it comes to food, white is a color. So, white has pigment to make something white, just like it has pigment to make it blue. So things like cauliflower and things like that, like they'll say eat colorful foods. And then people will say, well, I shouldn't eat celery, I shouldn't eat cauliflower, and I shouldn't eat iceberg lettuce because they're not colorful enough. But no, those things also have pigments in them that make them the colors that they are, basically. So this makes you eat antioxidants, and hence the name, what they are going to do is resolve oxidative stress. I think we all know that oxidative stress is something that usually results in cellular death, enhanced aging, things like that. It's the free radicals. You're exposed to an insult, cigarette smoke, air pollution, something like that. Free radicals are generated and they run around, and I am obviously not a biochemist. I think you probably gathered that by now, because to my mind, free radicals are just mad. And they're running around and they're like, ooh, attacking other cells. They're just angry at them. So they go after them and they mess with them and they mess them up. Well, free radicals, the antioxidants come along and just calm them down. And they do that by donating hydrogen. Here's a hydrogen. It's a gift. Settle down. Stop hurting all of these other cells. And that works great. And this makes really good sense as to why a high plant-based diet would be good for your lungs. Your lungs are exposed to a fair amount of oxygen. So anytime you have high levels of oxygen, you're running a risk of oxidative stress. So there's good biological plausibility for a plant-based diet being beneficial in lung disease. I put polyphenols on here because they've been on the news lately. And because, remember, coffee was a beneficial food on that food list when we were talking about scoring them. Coffee is one of our best sources of a polyphenol called phenolic acid. And polyphenols, I would say, we do not exactly know what they do. As far as I know right now, there's about 800 of them that we've named. I don't know how many more they are that we haven't even discovered. But they are they're in plants, they're in tea, they're in green tea, they're in coffee. They're kind of all over the place. They are an area of emerging research. They're a little harder for us to measure. They are isoflavones, flavonoids, flavonols. Soy is really high in like flavonoids and flavonols. And sometimes that's why soy is considered to be part of a healthy diet. It's probably because of the polyphenols in there. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these molecules. And I think one of the important things to take away from this is they occur together in food. And that's going to become important as we start to talk about, like, maybe sometimes why does research not work in nutrition? So these compounds occur together. Like if you come back to antioxidants. So if you are thinking about antioxidants and you think, all right, what's an obvious one? Beta carotene. So beta carotene's in carrots. Yes, very good. That's what makes them orange. But so is alpha carotene. There's many, many carotenoids that occur in carrots right along with the beta carotene. We just know a lot about beta carotene. We know how to measure it. We know how to measure it in your blood. We know how to measure it in your diet. It doesn't mean it's the most important antioxidant. It's just one that we have kind of latched onto because we understand it pretty well. So the obvious question here, maybe not the obvious question, but a question becomes, if we think that these are the mechanisms for why a healthy diet prevents disease, reduces inflammation, all of these things that I was just talking about that might benefit you, shouldn't I just take supplements? If beta carotene is an antioxidant, can't I just take a beta carotene supplement and now I'm all antioxidanted up and I can go on my merry way and that should be good enough? I see some people shaking their heads no, which is yes. Okay. So The short answer is no. I actually had a slide in here right after that that said no, but I thought that seems like that seems kind of silly. So we study nutrition all the time. I started thinking about this about, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. I was at a conference and I was presenting a poster, and the poster was, it was just a little study. It was 3,000 people, but it was just kind of some observational research. And it was like, wow, look at these people. They ate certain things this day, and the next day their lung function was better. And it was just some preliminary findings, and I was there, I was presenting my poster, and lots of people came up and were constructive and talked about it and said, cool. And one person came up to me and was angry. And he said, nutrition doesn't work. We study it. We do randomized controlled trials of nutrition. Nothing ever comes of them. Nutrition doesn't work. And I said, okay, all right, thank you. The next day I was eating lunch in a restaurant, and that same person came into the restaurant and came over to my table and started yelling at me again and said, look at you, you're eating a salad. Nutrition doesn't work. Why do you believe this? We study this, and every time we study it, we don't see anything. And at that point, I stood up and tried to explain the difference between constructive conversations at a conference and creepy stalkers, and things went downhill from there. What could possibly go wrong? He's not wrong. The point about this is he's not wrong. I got home and I started to think about this a lot, and I talked to a lot of people a lot smarter than I am. Why does that happen? What is going wrong? Because to be a nutrient, the definition of a nutrient is that it is essential for life. So when he says nutrition doesn't work, is that accurate? No. By definition, nutrients work because they're essential for life. So when we study them, why do they fall apart? Why don't these randomized controlled trials of nutrition work? Because that is true. Just an example of what goes wrong here. This is a lecture in and of itself, and it's a lecture I give often, many hours of it actually, about why this doesn't work. I think as healthcare professionals, it is really important to understand why randomized controlled trials of nutrition may not show you exactly what you're looking for, and why we need to think about them in a different way. Are there any, where are the pharmacy students? All right, so you guys are very, very familiar with randomized controlled trials. And when I'm doing a randomized controlled trial of a drug, I've got a group of people that I can give the drug, and I've got a control group, and the control group does not get the drug. These people have the exposure. These people do not have the exposure. How can I have a non-exposure control group when the thing I'm studying is essential for life? So if I'm studying calcium, I can't have a group that has no calcium, because they have seizures and they die. And that's not ethical. So how do I study? Is the question that I'm asking is not, with a randomized controlled trial, if I get this drug, does something happen to me that is better than what happens to the people who don't get the drug? What I'm asking in trials of nutrition is more better? Because I already have a baseline exposure. These people are already eating some calcium. If I supplement them with a whole bunch more calcium, is more better? What do you think the answer to that is? Sometimes depends where you start. It depends where you start. All right, let me give you a couple examples. So this was all over the news quite a number of years ago. This might be 2014 or something like that. I'm not exactly sure. So this was, on the news. It was in newspapers. I was a clinician at the time. So when this is on the news, guess what I walk into the next day when I come to work? And all of you will, at some point in your practice, so you're going to have a patient and they're going to see this on the news, and they're going to come in and they're going to say, should I stop eating vitamin E? Well, first of all, good luck with that, because that'd be hard to do. The study was vitamin E and selenium causes cancer. That's what was on the news. Vitamin E and selenium cause cancer. Okay, well, what actually happened? So this was the SELECT trial. So the SELECT trial enrolled all men because their primary outcome was prostate cancer. They enrolled men And it did, just by the demographics of the people that they enrolled, they were following them for a long time. This ended up being primarily white, primarily older, very well educated. Sometimes people call it the physician study because it was a majority of the people were trained in as physicians who participated in it. They gave these people about 20 times the recommended dietary intake for selenium and vitamin E. What happened, do you think? They got cancer. Okay. So that was very alarming. The study was stopped, shut down in the middle, because these supplements were causing cancer. This is all over the news, things like that, right? But this was a randomized controlled trial. What could possibly go wrong? All right, well, the first thing that could go wrong probably was, how many of those men, how many well-educated physicians, white, affluent, do you think are selenium deficient? How many of them do you think have poor diet? And that's exactly the right answer. None of them. So these people were completely selenium replete, and they threw a ton of selenium at them. And then bad things happened, and they were surprised. But I don't think some of us were surprised. So another thing that happened here was I also gave them tons and tons and tons of vitamin E. So when I think about vitamin E, and when you think about vitamin E, the form of vitamin E that you're thinking about is alpha tocopherol. It's kind of the vitamin E. Yeah, it's like if you get, you see it on a label or something like that. Vitamin E is alpha tocopherol, all right? But there are 8 forms of vitamin E. And one thing that we know about vitamin E is that if you take really, really big doses of one of them, you can't convert this to the other forms. Whatever form you eat it in, it pretty much stays in as it moves through the biochemistry and metabolism. So the serum levels of your other forms of vitamin E drop. If you take a ton of alpha tocopherol, your gamma tocopherol and your delta tocopherol drop in your serum. Okay, there's a competing effect there. So guess what in other literature has been associated with reduced risk of prostate cancer? Delta tocopherol. So when they gave these people tons and tons of alpha tocopherol, they may have been inadvertently lowering the main form of vitamin E that was going to protect them against prostate cancer. I could go on about that study all day, but I will stop because you get the point. I think you get the problem is we've learned how to do nutrition research by doing it badly. These studies they were well-intentioned studies that were trying to answer a question, usually based on what we consider to be the scientific process. If we observe this in observational studies, we see the populations of people who live in areas where the soil is very high in vitamin E and selenium have a lower risk of prostate cancer. We should do a randomized controlled trial. So we do, and it lets us down. And that's exactly why that person was upset at me, because it let us down. It wasn't vitamin E's fault. It wasn't selenium's fault. It was the fault of the trial design. This was another one, the alpha tocopherol beta carotene cancer prevention study group. This is a very famous one. You'll probably hear about this at some point in time. So alpha tocopherol is vitamin E, beta carotene is an antioxidant. They thought that giving people very, very high doses of these supplements, more than you could ever get in your diet, would prevent cancer. Oh, guess what happened? They got more cancer. So the study was stopped. By elevating beta carotene, like I said, it lowered all of the other carotenoids that may have more. We just know about beta carotene. That's the only one. All of these things occur in food together, and they work synergistically. And once you pull one out and give it, it a lot of times just has disastrous results, which is why pushing your patients not to take supplements and to eat their food is the absolute best thing they could do. If I wanted to measure your carotenoids, so say I want to know how many carotenoids you eat. So if you tell me about your diet, I think I can assess, I think it's like 16 maybe that I have named: lycopene, lutein, zeaxanthin, alpha carotene, beta cryptozanthine, alpha cryptozanthine. We know the names of all of these that you eat. If I want to measure it in your blood, I have a panel where I can do about 9 of them. We've named more than 200. So the fact that I randomly picked those 9 to measure does not mean I'm really effectively measuring the impact that carotenoids can have on your health. That's my last slide. that was a very abrupt ending. I thought there was more of a transition there. But what time is it? How did I do on time? Oh, so no time for questions. Sorry, everyone. I guess you just have to go. Wow, I do that. I talk way too long. Anybody have a super quick burning question? Nah. So one question, Daniel sent me some questions from students, and one that seemed to be a recurring theme. So I'm talking about a plant-based diet. One that seemed to be a recurring theme was, how do I do this on a budget? Which is relevant to students, and it's really, really relevant to a lot of your patients. And so the main thing I think is, don't overthink it. That's one of the things. Frozen vegetables are fantastic. A lot of times, in some cases, frozen vegetables are better than fresh, because as they sit out there, depending on how long they've been sitting in the store, the compounds will degrade. So frozen is great. Like carotenoids especially are really sensitive to light. So the longer they sit in the grocery store with the lights on, the more they're breaking down. I mean, one of the best things that you can eat as far as lycopene, which is a super powerful antioxidant, is canned tomato sauce, because the processing actually makes the lycopene easier to absorb. Did you have a question? Oh yeah. It does not do any good to supplement replete people. If you're vitamin D replete, supplementation won't help you. If you're low, it will help you. But yeah, no, and as we can see here, supplementing one thing way out of whack tends to not work out well for people. So yeah, I mean, did you say 10 grams a day? Yeah, yeah, yep, yeah. Yeah, vitamin D is very interesting. Vitamin D is one of the things that I might say you need a supplement. It's actually really hard to eat it, and unless you're in the sun a lot, especially in Nebraska, vitamin D is one supplement. And so you almost have to check people's serum levels to see where they are, and then just find a dose that they need that holds them there. But you know, you don't, if somebody walks in and they're replete, and this is the same thing has happened in multiple vitamin D trials where they gave people supplements. When they measured them at baseline, they weren't deficient. And so they didn't see any results. This has happened with respiratory disease all the time. In all of these studies, every time they do a sub-analysis and they pull out the people who were deficient at baseline, there's a beneficial effect. I'll let you guys go. You probably have someplace to be. Oh. Oh, I'm obviously well attended. Yeah, no, I'm great. Yeah. Uh-huh. So I think what I usually tell patients is that 80 try to eat right 80%, and 20% of the time, and you're gonna, because yes, I mean that absolutely there is, you can overdo it. Yep. And orange like mangoes, like there are some countries where they just eat like mangoes as a movement species, like kind of out in the places and eat some of the yeah, yeah, exactly. Everything. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm running around. I'm carrying all sorts of things.
Honestly, you have a lot of other stuff going on. I know you said you had a meeting.
You know, yeah, I do. It's a busy day. It's okay. And no, it's great. It's great.
I'm leaving for a conference next week, so it's one of those weeks where it's like cramp it in before you go, and then probably still get mailed when you do. Yeah. Thank you so much.
We ran out of slides, I think.